All right, welcome back to another episode of the TED Talk. One more tier event in the history books, meaning that we have another reason to sit here and talk about some of the most interesting things that have happened in the world of Tier 1 Counter-Strike, which is what we do on this show, right? We've never discussed Tier 2 Counter-Strike, never will in the future. No, I am kidding. We will eventually, but for today's episode, I have a returning guest to the show, probably like 5, 6, 7 times at this point, is Thorin himself. Duncan, thank you for joining me. What's been new in your life? How are things going?
I mean, technically, nowadays, actually, it's impossible to avoid tier two because actually one of the changes that VRS brought that people
Mm,
don't actually acknowledge. This is what's funny, right? One thing you have to watch for in life is people will say they want things based on an idea, but then they don't actually look at what the outcome is. So what's funny is one thing people never credit VRS for is exactly what they were asking for years and years and years, which is if you go back in time like 10 years to my heyday, one of the most famous things back then was tournament organizers famously used to invite teams. And I know now it says VRS invites, but those
sure.
aren't really invites because like the tournament organizer doesn't get to choose who they invite. What they have to do is they have to invite the top X. And then if people don't know, if some of those people decline along the way, then yes, the next person gets the invite option, etc. But it's not an invite in the sense of like you sit there like, I'd like to have this team there. But if you remember back in the day, most famously teams like Virtus Pro or NIP, where they
Yeah.
had like legendary players, even if those teams were bad, like Virtus Pro was once upon a time, they would still get invited to like every big Cologne and all that because you just wanted them at the event. Whereas actually one thing about VRS that wasn't even necessarily intentional by Valve is because it just goes by where you actually are on the VRS placing.
Mm,
It means that actually now teams, I mean, the obvious example is teams like Foot. If you can climb out of tier two, you can just be out of tier two forever if you're actually just good enough at the game. It doesn't. You don't ever have to convince a TO that you're popular or you're going to big name players. So actually, in a weird sense, now I actually think everyone in CS is scrambling to learn more about tier two and tier 1.5. Like you can't do what I used to do back in the day. Where I used to just say, if you're not in the top 10, I almost don't give a fuck about your
right.
team. Like you have to prove it to me. In the modern day, you actually have to care. So to some degree, it's actually your time, Ted.
It's killing elitism in Counter Strike, right? That's what I like, man. I've always enjoyed Tier 2 Counter Strike, Tier 3 Counter Strike because I think a lot of the good ideas and a lot of the crafty plays are actually being created in the doldrums, right? Where the grind happens, and for a lot of the players, they actually, I think, show character, and for some of them, you can spot that potential very early in their career, which is interesting to watch. But yeah, it's making it interesting. It's making it possible for Bulgaria to
No,
have
it
another
is
major
though. Those
representative.
people have all earned their way there, mate. I'll give you an
Exactly.
example. If people saw some of the smaller lands recently, and an example would be like that Alliance team, where they're like, "What the hell? This
Yeah.
team's beating good teams." Well, what did you expect? Literally, when you go online, they're better than those big teams that you know that are
Mm,
bad online. Like they just are. Like if you had Alliance play Liquid tomorrow, I would take Alliance, mate. Like Alliance has earned it with all the million online games where they've done that. So it's not like they're
yeah.
there as a fluke. The joke is the other way around. It's actually like the Liquids of the day and the phases that are getting you more into that VP territory I said before, where look, 10, 7 years ago, they'd have been fine still. They'd get invited
Sure.
because of who they are, but you don't now. You have to actually earn your spot in CS, which I do think is good. I do think meritocracy is the way to go.
I was gonna ask you, what do you feel? How do you feel about this? By the way, this is, I think, an interesting talking point because you gave like 6, 7 years ago as an example. You had the Louvre, you had the other agreements with Blast, for example, as well, and a lot of these teams that were very. I don't want to say they were very bad, but there was no way for us. Let's say EG is a very extreme example. They were terrible towards the end. But for a lot of these teams, it was actually impossible to evaluate on how good they are because they would never play the tier 2 teams because the tier 2 teams wouldn't have a way into these events, well, unless it was a major. And then for the tier 1 events, those lineups like Big, for example, if they were in the worst for form, like EG, even Liquid, if they had some off time, all of these teams, all of these organizations, they could never drop out of tier 1 Counter-Strike. They would always be invited to the next event. So for us as people that were watching the game, obviously I wasn't working as actively in the space back then, so I was just looking at it from the point of a fan. For me, it wasn't a question of, okay, now Big is very bad, so will they play the next big event? For me, it was, they are very bad, so are they going to be able to fix their issues for the next EPL, for example, or whatever? It was kind of like the comeback story, but there was never there was never any punishment for them not being up to the level. And now there is. Now you're looking at the bottom of the top 17 in Europe, the teams that will get invited to Cologne. You have teams like Gentlemaids, you have teams like Monty, like Heroic, like Gamer Legion, Foot are in stage 2 most likely. So how do you feel about this as someone that used to enjoy just the top 10 teams that didn't really care about the rest? Do you feel like it's fair? Do you enjoy it more as it is right now?
One angle I don't like is that in theory, like for example, this is why I wasn't a fan of ESL and Blast having online group stages, because I do think in that scenario, then you are essentially like testing for something that the LAN won't show, which is how good are you online, which isn't always a one-to-one that you're good on LAN as well. So it does mean every now and then, unfortunately, you'll get like a lower down team that would be way better at the LAN that will lose to. I'll just use examples here that'll hurt people's feelings. An M80 type team online might
Sure.
be able to get the win, whereas maybe they wouldn't on LAN, you know. You can get the odd game like that ruins it, but the key thing for me is like actually what you just said before as well. If you were a top team, even if you were bad, even if you were Evil Geniuses or some of the bad Cloud9 lineups, etc., you still just went to every tier 1 LAN if you could. You never ever went to a tier 2 LAN, because if anything, by the way, you'd show yourself up. What if you went there and lost? The joke is, this is how VRS again has semi-fixed the scene, right? If people don't know recently, I'll keep using the Team Liquid example.
Yeah.
Team Liquid themselves had to turn down a tier 1 invite. They turned down PGL Cluster Poker because at the time with the European roster, they were really scared that if they went there, because they knew, even though those were all tier 1 teams, that most of them would beat Team Liquid. They knew if we went there, we're basically just throwing our VRS points in the bin and we'll definitely not make the major. So actually, that's why, if people don't know, they turned down like a real tournament and went to one of these small, tiny tournaments, which the joke being they didn't end up doing well enough and they had to do this roster move to get back to the bloody Americas angle. But in a weird way, Ted, what that means, if you think about it logically, is if the team are actually self-aware, it even means they themselves, if they're a bullshit team, will take themselves out of the mix for the tier 1 LAN and just go and play teams more at their level and see if they actually are good or not. And I think in some ways you could actually make the case, as bizarre as it sounds, that if you're glad that Team Liquid made a roster move, and by the way, I don't think this is the last one they're making this year, you should actually thank VRS. If they'd have been able, like some of those old teams like Evil Geniuses, like you'll say, man, Evil Geniuses had that roster for like a year or something, bro. It was crazy. And remember, they had a period, I think, where they lost like, I don't know, 9 series in a row on LAN. Like they didn't have to do anything though, because as you say, the actual economic situation back then is it wasn't how good the players were, it was the fact you're Evil Geniuses. So if you're Evil Geniuses, you have the Blast spot, which is like good few $100,000, better part of $1 million. If you make the major because of the RMR, remember America's RMR back then was basically like you had to be pretty bad not to make it. That's another set of sticker money. So the problem was you could actually have no fucking results at all in a whole year, but still sort of like balance the books and make it make sense. In the modern day, if you spend like the Liquids of the world have, you have to get results, otherwise you won't be in the tournament. So I actually think that aspect is almost inarguably good if you just want the end product of the best tournaments with the best teams. I think this is what you get actually. There's still flaws, obviously. It's just been implemented like last year or whatever.
Yeah.
But I actually think people don't give credit because here's the problem it has. Because of how scuffed VRS was for the first like 3 to 6 months, where no one, first of all, one, like it was badly implemented, and then two, no one really knew how it worked. No one knew sort of the Messi also angles and the Jame angles that are being exploited now. People just thought this is going to suck, actually, going to be way worse. I actually think in the meantime, it caught up so fast that last season. And I actually think most of the things people complain about now actually just, like I say, like this, actually work for them. Because I think they think it's whack when these teams go to Dracula and these small.
Sure.
No, it isn't, because when they go to those lands and lose to like multiple teams, not just one team, multiple teams, and some of them who you know wouldn't actually even be that good in tier 1, that actually does show that like we shouldn't just let these teams bottom feed at the fucking biggest lands and then because they have a big name just let them keep going. Because if you do that, eventually you've just got a bunch of fake teams in your league that aren't real competitive squads.
I think in some way, if you're someone that enjoys exposing big teams and names and being like these guys are imposters and whatever, the fact that they are, you know, forced to play events like the Roman Imperium Cup or Draculan or BC Game Masters or whatever is actually good, because you can actually tell that, let's say, the level of Counter-Strike that Liquid and FaZe Clan are implementing is not up to scratch with a lot of the tier 2 teams. We're not even speaking about the other tier 1 teams, right? So it is very interesting for the competition side of things. I'm glad you mentioned Liquid, because I think this is a good leeway into the first topic that I wanted to discuss today, and we can kind of do that before we get into EPL and what happened there. Team Liquid did find a way to get themselves into the major, which they could have missed very realistically because results have been very bad for them. But after playing the Roman Imperium Cup with Jo as a stand-in, and interestingly enough, he was their best player at that event, which was pretty hilarious considering he's not played professional CS in 1 year. But they did decide to pull off a move, and they swapped NertZ for MOUZ, allowing Liquid to once again compete in the NAVRS, meaning that they will most likely be in Cologne. MOUZ is back playing in NA. NertZ goes out of Liquid, goes over to join G2. What was your initial reaction onto that? Because you did mention that you're expecting Liquid to make more changes. I'm willing to jump on the same ship on this one. Well, not willing. I am on the same ship with this one. But do you like the MOUZ change? Was that one of the swaps that you would see coming? Because we were discussing this on the overcommed with King T, me and you. I guess we were kind of looking at some of the other players on Liquid as must changes. Is that a VRS move? Is that a VRS move and them winning on the back of getting MOUZ on the team? What is going on Liquid? What do you make of this initial change?
The problem to me is whatever change you make, since I don't think that team is just a one-team change. Like,
Yeah.
spoiler, at some point they're gonna have to change the AWP. That's just everyone's figured this out at this point in time. But more than that, the main thing for me is this: if you change the IGL, then I'm fine with keeping both NertZ and Liege. Okay, maybe someone else can crack that nut and make it work and find some combination. But I do think, actually, if you look at those two players, this is where I actually think what Elige did in Complexity and FaZe has warped people's perception of who he is as a player. Because he essentially was the hard entry T-side player, and he was doing a good job at it. So it made people think that's who he is as a player. So I think people thought in this team, Elige would do some of that, and then it would set NertZ up to be like the playmaker type figure, etc. But the problem is, I actually think both of them essentially are at their best in that exact same playmaker role. So to me, unfortunately, it's why, if you notice, they're somewhat neutralized. I'll even go one further and say I think the same thing happened when you had Twists and NertZ. I don't think they ever both really looked good. You either had one looked good and one was off, or in the case of more recently, both kind of looked whack when it was Elige and NertZ now. So to me, the reason why I think this move's interesting is most people are already focusing on the cynical part that for Liquid, the upside is you immediately get back in the stage 2 of the major pretty much, and you get this easy America's route going forwards, and obviously, and now you can do the whole branding if we're an American team again. Plus, you still got a Liege, you can still do the whole hey, look, we're NA, etc. I actually think the more important factor, if you want to go can Liquid ever be good, is that even though this is a downgrade, malbs is not as good a player as NertZ. The difference is, I actually think if you watch how they used malbs the last year or so in G2, and then when he used to have Nico, I think if you are a Liege, you are the happiest person ever with this trade, bro. This should be the guy who I think you will just use malbs like you did on G2. He'll just be the first guy who goes brute force in, and then Liege will be the one who trades him and will be the one who benefits from this and potentially has a chance to become a star player again. So that angle for Liquid's not bad. It's essentially you're streamlining it a bit. We're taking out a bit of star power, but that never fully manifested. We're trying to make our original star, Elige, bigger. Obviously, the G2 side's just got an obvious upside. You put NertZ to a Saw again. It seemed like already he's still a good player. He just didn't seem like he fit Liquid for whatever reason. As I say, maybe he himself didn't benefit that much from that. By the way, spoiler, I predict the same thing in G2. I imagine in G2 they'll go Matisse. You're now the hard entry guy, whereas malbs is doing that for you. I think these are actually, here's one thing I like in general in Counter-Strike 10. It's why if I ever do my theory of Counter-Strike, if you notice, most of my teams that I would build on paper would never be super teams. Because what I really want is I just want all the roles to fit. I think once the roles fit, not only can you then get a sense of how the team should operate, but it makes it easier to sort of know where in the machine something went wrong. All right, it's this person here. He's having issues doing this, so we can't. So a classic example would be, this is why they brought Tenator Spirit. People thought they didn't have a late round lurker type player. Zontix wasn't really that guy on T side. So I like it when teams make sense. The problem you had in Liquid was, on paper, it was just a bunch of good players, but the roles didn't necessarily make perfect sense, So I actually think this is a rare example of a trade where both sides benefit from it. In fact, the bigger point to me is, since I don't know the behind the scenes, I've tried thinking back and forwards on this so many times. I'm really unsure who stimulated this move. Do you know what I mean? I could see a way in which it could be both teams, or it could just have been the other one. So I find it so weird to actually figure out who wanted this move done, because I think both in the end it works out for both teams. But who was the one who initiated it?
That's a great question. If I had to think logically about it, I'd say maybe if you're Liquid, you just wanted a change and you just wanted a convenient one, right? Something that makes a little bit of sense. I wouldn't necessarily say that, and this is again us just trying to theorize, I guess, to some extent. But I would say that if you're Liquid, you were just desperate to change something, and maybe something that's not a Liege, maybe something that's not Chewy, if you had decided that you wanted to keep the IGL. But Liquid is in that type of a position where I would say they can't really hold on to anything if a better opportunity arises. I would put my money that G2 were the ones looking for a change, because again, one of the things that we discussed throughout the last couple of months, or at least that's how it looks like from the outside, we can never know for sure, but it felt like malbs was uncomfortable individually. He was far from the level that he was able to bring to the table on M80, and then early on when he joined G2, and obviously there could be a lot of reasons, more responsibility on him after Nico's left, the fact that a lot of people put their expectations on him to be the next star of the team, even though he's not really that type of a guy. He's more of a soldier, right? He can be a star to some extent, but he's not going to be your number one star most likely. So I would say that maybe with G2, especially because the roles did make a whole lot of sense. If you have just one more person to be, you know, a little bit more of a refragger hybrid, maybe could be a little bit lurky, could be a little bit aggressive on CT side, so you can open up Mattis's space to be the soldier of the team. Just the fact that they had two soldiers, I think, for G2. So I like the angle.
Wouldn't you also agree, even if MOUZ had his problems,
Yeah.
Matisse had his own individual problems, mate. He wasn't really making enough use of those
Oh, yeah,
resources.
yeah.
Like, he was in the position for me to be the aggressive star of G2.
Sure.
And he didn't really live up to it. Like, everyone who's praising Heavy God, mate, it's Matisse who didn't do his part of the job. If he'd have done his part of the job, him and Heavy God, mate, that'd get you like a bunch of semis and playoffs every time, pretty much. So, it's not to hate on Matisse. Like, I actually do think it's worth giving him another chance, changing his role. But I think he just showed he wasn't the right person to be the carry, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for those types of players, they can carry you through some maps, but it's almost unrealistic to expect them to be consistent all the time, right? I know I love drawing that parallel, but it's kind of like expecting Config in 2017 to be dropping 30 bomb every single map. It's like every now and then you're going to have that very sharp player that's going to go in and win you a game. That's what, let's say, Flamesy was for Vitality last year. Whenever he hits, he's going to go in and hit very, very hard, but he's the first guy to go in, so he's never going to be the hyper carry of the team. It's just not his style of play. But I think for G2, it actually makes a whole lot of sense. Also, NertZ gets reunited with Saul, with some Pius, so you feel like he's going to be playing a little bit better. We've said that multiple times for Saul, or at least throughout the last couple of years. I felt like maybe some Pius's career would have fallen through after the Falcons if he didn't go back to playing under Saul. I feel like with NertZ, this might happen as well, to the extent where Saul's just able to save him the way that he's been
This one's even
trying
more
to
of a
save some
slam dunk, though,
Pius.
Ted, because the difference is the Sun Pius one is like, okay, he's trying to like hope that he can reignite the magic, you know.
Sure.
The people forget Saul was also in the heroic that NertZ was in, and
Yeah.
basically both Ents and heroic, NertZ was really good. It's the only team he sucked in his Liquid where he didn't have Saul. So that one to me is like, if you are Saul on G2, that's an obvious gamble to take because no one else is going to pay big bucks and get NertZ. I agree with you. We'd probably actually be in a tough spot. We'd have to go to a worse squad. Whereas this is not only the one chance for him to go to like a better team, basically, but also for that team, since it looks like, if you notice the direction of big stars, it doesn't look like they want to sign some giant name, you know. This is actually a pretty good deal for G2 in terms of like, it's the right gamble to make. If this doesn't work, I don't think anyone will blame them. There's a lot of like, as you said, there's multiple reasons that make sense to give this a shot. And I actually think this one's better than the Sun Pius one too, because the difference is like, Sun Pius was a lot worse at his lowest than NertZ was here, in my opinion. NertZ just wasn't a star. Let's put it that way. I don't think he was ever truly bad at the game.
No, I don't feel like so as well. It's very weird to look at a team as dysfunctional as Liquid and be like, this person is struggling individually, right? Unless you're talking, let's say if you're making the argument about Ultimate, I guess, you can say he's been struggling for consistency for 2.5 years. But with NertZ...
By the way, his problem is just that he was never a top player outside of Liquid, so we can't know, can we? Because I saw that Launders in his most recent video did the joke that just like his famous thing he said on Snake about it, like your time on NIP doesn't count for XCP. Essentially, he's like, we should just do the same with Liquid. It's sort of true because if you look at people who got join Liquid, just like NIP, most of them are good players who join, get way worse, but then leave and eventually become really good again. Like on Liquid, obviously examples is like Yekindar, etc. Twisted himself, got even more insane. Like, there's a bunch. The joke is it's actually rarer that people join the team suck and aren't good. Like actually, Cadian's a rare example of someone who just didn't work. Actually, it just never was actually that good afterwards. But I think all the rest of these players, it does look like at this point in time, you can't just judge their entire career by what happened on Liquid. There's some weird like bad vibes in that team that's like neutralizing everyone's ability or something, mate.
Yeah. The thing with some of these players, I think it's easier to defend NertZ than it is to defend Ultimate, because Ultimate didn't really have that much of a career prior to Liquid, right? Even from my perspective as someone that watches a lot of Tier 2 and Tier 3 Counter-Strike, Ultimate was not really a breakthrough star in online CS in Europe. Let's say if you're making the equivalent for patzy, for example, patzy's even a very extreme example because he had played major semifinals before joining with Spirit, but even someone like Rainwaker, he was still good in Tier 2 Counter-Strike. He still reached top 20, let's say, in 2021 with a team, obviously, not individually. With Ultimate is very weird because he never was on the top level of Tier 2 Counter-Strike, and then he jumps into Liquid, so this is kind of the only... it is the only competition that you can use as an example to evaluate on what his level is. You can't just say, well, Yeah, but he was very good in that one tier 4 online cup years ago. That means he's got a lot of potential, right? The only way to know if this person maybe had more potential is let's talk to some of his day one teammates that actually know what they're talking about. They're not going to be biased and they will tell you what his strong and bad sides are. But as far as I am concerned right now, it feels like we both like what that has done for G2. About Liquid, just to keep it short, so we can get into the FaZe conversation and then the EPO conversation. Um, what would be the next move for Liquid right now? What are you looking at here?
Thing is, to me, right, there's two options you do, but only one's a player change. You either change the ARPA, just the obvious one to make. Like, the rest of the roles fit, and also, I just don't fully believe that, like, Shui's a bad IGL or whatever. But the other move to
Yeah.
me you make is the coach move. You just bring
Okay.
a different coach in, you know. But if here's the thing, if I were them, I wouldn't recruit a coach based on he is just a good coach or has a big name. I would actually literally look at what you lack in your squad. Like I saw the Steeco video the other day where he actually quite accurately shows that it's not even people are just like bad at the game. They're just really bad. Like the communication of the team
Yeah.
is terrible in that squad. Like people even do shit, which I would speculate is more like they play like they're not the one that's going to make the big mistake on camera that gets you fired, if you know what I mean. It's
Yeah.
like instead of thinking how do we get really good, it's like I don't want to be the next one kicked, which is a very different mentality. So what I would do is I would look at that, and then the obvious angle there would be if I'm bringing in a coach, it's got to be someone whose specialty is things like communications, team structuring, etc. You know, instead of it might not necessarily be that we just pick the biggest name possible. You know, because I do think the problem with Liquid is you either just completely reset the whole squad and keep like
Sure.
one or two players, or even just kick the whole team and buy a new squad, or you're trying again to just bring like the right piece in that activates everyone else. And I'm not against that latter point. Like I still look at some of these names. I also think like the Liquid NIP example earlier. I also sort of feel like you'll kick yourself if you let all these players go, because if in a year from now Shuhei actually is like a good IGL on like a top 10 team, and then fucking Elijah's joined, and if the joke is Elijah goes to Passion UA and suddenly they're 13th in the world, you'll actually regret letting these players go if you then signed like by the way, this is one angle where I am always going to be against other analysts. Other
Sure.
analysts will do this thing where they'll pick a team that's technically better now and say just sign them. So like a joke would be they'd go just kick this Liquid squad and sign M80. It's like, okay, I've signed M80, brilliant. Now how do I ever get from there to winning a major, mate? I don't do. I like all you've done is give me like a tiny upgrade that in the long run never ever lets me be Team Liquid again. So I would never do that personally. Like in my opinion, you either like reset the whole thing and you sign a squad with massive potential. It's too late now, but it would have been a foot type team where you gamble that they become really good,
Yeah.
or a Paravision type squad, or you just do what I said. You figure out which person can activate the others in the team. Because I refuse to believe these players all just suck at the same time. The only one is Ultimate, because like I say, he was never anything before this squad. So to me, he's the easiest kick to make.
Yeah, yeah. It feels like there's a couple. I think there's a couple easy pulls. Now you bring in malbs. You definitely want to free him up and kind of bring back that vibe of Stewie and Elige that they had back in 2019, right? Where Stewie would be the soldier and Elige would just play on a bit of a refrag. So this is a bit
It
reminiscent.
was a great combo.
Yeah, it was a very good combo. Won him a Grand Slam. And then you're looking at Chewie as the IGL. I'm willing to agree with you on that. The coach angle is very interesting. And I suggest we slowly move into the FaZe conversation, because me, you, and King T had that talk on Overcom just a week ago, where we talked about how poor tactically FaZe Clan has been looking in the last couple of weeks. And then a couple days later, they released the announcement that Neo's not part of the team anymore. So yeah, 3 years with the team. He's played 3 major finals with them and hasn't won a single one, which is a little bit unfortunate for Neo, but he's out of the lineup. For now, Groovy is going to be the interim coach, apparently. And for those of you that don't know, Groovy is a Polish player. He's 31 years old. He used to be on teams like Illuminar, like Kovana, like AGO back in 2017, 2021. He was actually part of that AGO lineup that I think a lot of his teammates later on went over to Virtus Pro. Yeah, so he's been around the block for a while. I don't really know how he's gonna do as a coach, as this is his first gig as a coach. But this is the move that FaZe decides to make. Now, what I will say about this, I think it is interesting that Carrigan, literally 10 minutes before we started recording this interview, he released, or recording this episode, he released an interview saying it kind of came as a surprise to all of us because we were this close to the major on the Neo removal. Meaning it might have been an organization decision, not the team's decision to remove Neo as a coach. So what do you make of this?
This is where, again, I'm probably going to be quite different to other people. Like, one, when I'm on these podcasts, I don't give a flying fuck if I'm friends with pro players. I don't just say things so they agree with me. Go,
Sure.
oh, good. Like, by the way, you know that the way you set that up there, where you're like, the org might the org is literally the only person who should be firing and hiring the coach. Like,
Okay.
the org is above the players, the coach is above the players, and the coach is between the org and the players. So, totally logically, the only person who can actually evaluate the coach and know if he's doing a good enough job is the org. So, I know players and fans would be like, the players didn't even know. Who gives a fuck? They get played to click the mouse, and at the moment, not a lot of them are clicking the mouse very well. So I don't really give a flying fuck whether they're happy or not. Also, when your team is this bad, let's be real, relative to expectations and the name value, FaZe isn't just bad; they're really bad, bro. Like, they're totally irrelevant in European Counter Strike right now, right? If you look how bad they are, if you're a player, how dare you actually speak out against a move like this? Who the fuck are you? By the way, you should be fired. How about that? How about them apples? Like, what I don't get is, this is one thing about pro players, they're fucking shameless, bro. If a pro player gets played 12,000 a month, but then in 6 months from now, he's twice as good and he's mega and he knows all the people as good as him make 50k, he'd be like, I'm underpaid. Then when he has a 25k a month salary and he's shit for 6 months, he'll never ever go, maybe I'm earning a bit too much. It's kind of irresponsible the way I'm just... No. He always thinks whatever he gets is expected, and he's always owed more. But what I don't get about this is, I always make this point, esports isn't at the point where the orgs make massive amounts of money from the players. It's not like a traditional sport in that setup.
Yeah.
So we all have this skewed perspective where what we actually think of, it's because of how economic, like, political activism has worked. We all think of jobs as the person who owns the company makes all the profit, and then you're the worker battling for your little share of it and trying to get more and more and more. In esports, you always have to remember, guys, the only group of people who make money constantly, who aren't Valve and never lose money, is pro players. So why do we all feel so sorry for pro players? Like, when you say that about Neo, right? My first thought there is, motherfucker, you had 3 years to make it work. You had 3 years to do the following: win a major, shows you're really good, ever get the hype going. By the way, a point I've always made about Neo, and I think this kills his case dead that he's an excellent coach, is they never fucking mention him inside their team. He's in the videos, but no player in an interview ever goes, oh, you know that, like, amazing play we made on round 12? Oh, Neo came up with that and, like, was scouted the opponent, and, you know, oh, I saw that there was, like, a way that the CT rotation works on, like, and then he like told us, like, what? You never hear that, mate. He's invisible. In fact, think about both players and fans. When people evaluate the tactics and the structure of FaZe, people only talk about Carrigan. That's all they do. They just talk about, does Carrigan calling well? Does he have the read of the meta? They act like they don't even have a coach in FaZe. So what I don't get about that is, one, it implies to me, at a minimum, even if you were good, you weren't like some blade figure who was like essential. You were just doing like an all right job. I imagine he probably did his... By the way, he's a very diligent player. I imagine he probably did his homework and watched the demos and wrote his notes down and passed them to people. Whoa. But what was the impact is the question. And if the team's this bad player-wise, I actually agree with also Carrigan's speculation. Like, the real reason you do this now is, if you're a FaZe fan, someone had to be fired. Someone had to. So it's not going to be a player, because it's going to be really hard to scramble now, get the VRS wins, bring a player in. Who are you going to sign? Have you got more? The best short-term sort of concession to fans of, like, we get that the team's fucked up, is at least fire the coach that may or may not have even been any good at his job. Because the biggest problem you have with Neo, it's funny, I did make this point a while ago and everyone ignored me. Everyone loved from day one to bang on Taz when he was in G2. Every fucking time this guy ever lost a game, or they lost a stupid, like, Falcons-esque screenshot meta round, it was always his fault. And what was he doing in timeouts? And then Neo, the whole 3 years, has just sat there like the flirt and harassment meme, just doing the same shit, and everyone's just been like, yeah, but Neo's a legend though, isn't he? Which I'll never get, by the way, because Taz is a legend. Like, it's such a bizarre, like, double standard to me. So I'll never get that angle. Like, again, as I say, if I'm hating on him secretly, I just didn't know why. How are we supposed to outside know he did anything? We've never had even a reason to have a clue. In fact, I'll even add this finally. If you ever watch the videos with Carrigan and Neo, because they're not that dissimilar in age, the joke is, you'd have a really hard time if you watched that video and you didn't know the team, guessing who was the coach. Like, half the time it feels like Carrigan's the one talking and Neo's the one listening. And Neo sometimes almost has the vibe of, like, assistant coach to Carrigan, if you ever watched those videos. Like, seemed like they worked out together. So I also felt like, because, like Taz, it was his first big coaching job, I don't know that he ever, like, fully realised what the gig was supposed to be. Because I do think in other teams, you're supposed to be the leader of the whole project, and it's your idea. And you ask for the players to come in. And I never got the sense Neo was doing that. Again, I'm having to speculate, obviously, but I don't think I'm too far wrong if you kind of read between the lines of what people have said.
No, especially if you look at even the way that they've been playing Counter-Strike. I think behavior is very interesting to analyze as well, but I I did try to think about whether I've identified a big change, a big shift in the type of CS that FaZe was playing prior to Neo when they had Robin, and then after Neo joined. I feel like they've just been playing the same Counter-Strike for years,
I think so
which tells you enough. I mean, it tells you that this is Karrigan's policy. It's just very chaotic. Maybe it's gonna work on stage against a team that has bad mental, and then the bullshit will win you some rounds. But we had a look at some examples literally a couple of days ago on Overcompton. It's just very dry what they do. It's very out of meta, it's very out of touch, it's very chaotic. A lot of the times it doesn't make sense, and eventually when you're the coach you have to take responsibility of that. Now we can only speculate whether the dynamic on the team was actually good enough, and whether I don't want to make it sound like Karrigan is some kind of an evil guy that doesn't let his coaches actually have a say into what Counter-Strike the team plays, but from the outside it just feels like there's no thought into the game. There's no preparation. There's no clear game plan, or no clear effort being put into playing up to speed and up to meta Counter-Strike, which has to fall on the shoulders of someone. And these people are oftentimes going to be the IGL, the coach, and the assistant coach, right, for a team. So yeah, I'm on with you. He's been there for 3.5 years. The team is playing very bad Counter-Strike, and they've been playing bad tactical Counter-Strike for a long time. People even called for Karrigan's head towards the end of last year. No one mentioned Neo, so I think Karrigan's had his fair share of criticism as well. So yeah, I like the move. I don't think that one move fixes it. Even if Groovy is very good tactically, it's probably going to be very difficult for him to just join in. I would imagine, as he's an interim coach, I'd imagine he's just coming in as a short-term solution up until they actually choose a permanent candidate. Maybe he's going to stay as an assistant coach after they have a permanent guy, but I still don't know if this is going to change FaZe. I still believe, though, that the player quality on this team is high enough that if they are actually to play meta and proper Counter-Strike, they can be much better than what they are right now. Because right now, the state of them is very, very, very bad. And I think all of them know it. I think they realize that it's not really a thing to doubt. So it will be interesting. Who would you want to see on FaZe? Because obviously we were talking about coaches, and I want to ask you your opinion on that, because we were talking about potentially Flashy being replaced on Liquid FaZe now, not having a head coach permanently. Ash is still a free agent technically. So what are we thinking
here's
there?
the thing. Normally, I would, if this were, I made this point on Overcom. It's another subtle point people missed, like analytically, about FaZe, which is the real reason that the Jacob move is so egregious in FaZe is because it violates the principle of what FaZe Clan was, which is FaZe Clan is the team where you're already a star level player and an experienced player, and you go there to complete your trophy cabinet by winning the major and winning the biggest trophies. Like, unfortunately, that's why the Jacob
was
move
great,
failed.
by the way.
That's why everyone thought it was a good signing, because on paper it made sense. The reason the Jacob signing sucks is that's the signing you do where you're bringing an inexperienced player in. He's going to work with the coach in the IGL. He's going to develop as a player. He's going to take one role initially. He's going to expand it. That's not who FaZe Clan is. In fact, actually, they don't even play that brand of Counter-Strike. And as we previously alluded to, that's even why I would speculate Neo didn't do his job. Because you know what? If Neo, here's the difference. You know why none of us said fire Robban? Because it worked. There was something about that weird balance that did work, that strange, unorthodox way of the coach not having that much input, but having like almost like a man management approach, and then Karrigan getting essentially to be like a mini coach in the server, but then having all of his vision work. That worked. The problem with Neo is it didn't work doing the Karrigan vision as well as with Robban. And then crucially, I'd actually say the Jacob period is what I think deserves him being fired, because that was your chance then, if it wasn't working with the other method, to do something like, by the way, he's even fucking Polish, bro. Like, I'm sure you have mad connections in the Polish scene. You could find out what this guy's like and what's worked in the past. And by the way, I would imagine they did all these things. Everyone who kept saying that shit, you know, all the Polish fans, you might have seen them online. They basically just defend every Polish player. Like, Snacks never did anything wrong ever. Taz has never done anything wrong ever. So the way that they defend Jacob is they always say he's not in the right roles. Bro, the coach is the person who'd have a say in that. And if the coach himself is Polish and in theory could not only talk to Jacob, but could also go to his former team and find out what's going on, at that point, I don't think Neo's an idiot. I imagine he has thought about these things. I think that is what they thought was the right way to use Jacob, and it didn't work. So I also think that's a problem right there, because if Neo had actually been able to make Jacob like way better than we expected, and he sort of made it through this gauntlet where everyone's criticizing him, and we were just now hating only on Brokey or something, then actually that would actually be like what you call a feather in his cap for Neo. We could go, okay, but maybe he's like a guy who can develop players though, and he has his own perspective. He hasn't succeeded in that regard either. So in my opinion, that's the reason why normally I would say don't get a coach like Ash, because that violates the
Sure.
FaZe doctrine too. We've never seen Ash actually coach an elite team full of people who should win the championship. His whole thing is you get the players that are like a little bit less known, you scout them,
Yeah.
then you bring them in, you figure out their role, and then over time you gradually elevate the team. And then his problem is he keeps getting cut off at like the tier 1.5 level, basically. He never gets to properly go and have the team that can challenge. Now, normally, FaZe Clan would be an inappropriate place for him to go. It's why I actually said some of the other teams out there, like people wanted him on a Liquid, and I was like, again, it's star names though. Here's why I wouldn't hate it now though, because if the implication is FaZe Clan really cannot spend money, and right now, I think a lot of pro players know it's kind of like a potentially dead team, so I also think people aren't hyped to go there. That's probably when someone like Ash is the most valuable, because maybe he can not only get the PRs of the world to come, but maybe he can, as he did, find the next PR, find the next insert Immer. That's where actually him being able to scout a player better than a Jacob might be useful. I mean, the obvious angle, if we all take the Jacob thing out, is everyone wants Brokified just like Ultimate, but everyone's going to say that thing that I say on all the podcasts. Who are you going to say? I don't need to answer that. Ash could answer that question. He probably has a short list of 5 people. Now, the joke would be he has been trash at signing Orpers, but you know what? He wasn't Gamer Legion, to be fair. He wasn't in fucking FaZe Clan. I will point that out. So that's not as attractive a place, Gamer Legion. So he was often working with like people's leftovers.
Yeah.
I wouldn't hate putting him in. I also imagine, by the way, even though people see him as like a mastermind, like a Blade figure, but at tier 2, he wouldn't do that if he had this play and Carrigan and people like that. He would give some of those people freedom, and he would do what a good sports football manager does, where you have your own vision, but at the same time, if you have some mega player, you don't go, I'm going to step on your toes and make it into this bitch role here. You give him his space, and then you work with the rest of the squad on your vision. So I wouldn't even hate a move like that. I think it'd be a good one. And I have also heard behind the scenes like he will in the future probably coach a team that isn't Gold Legion.
You know what's the thing with that? I actually feel like picking up a coach who is a little bit better at building the fundamentals is going to be good for FaZe. And I'm going back to being a hater here, but it's just fundamentally the Counter-Strike they play is very bad. With the quality of players they have, if they have someone that can make them disciplined enough and have a base level of preparation, which is very weird to say about people with so much experience that should have so much skill, but if they just have that baseline fundamental being brought into the game with the level of skill they've got, I think they're going to be much better than they are right now. It's just I think that could be beneficial for them, having someone that can, you know, build up a team from nothing, pretty much. Do it with people that actually know what they're doing. Do it with people that actually have opinions and that can help them out. I think that would be a dope move. I actually don't dislike it at all. When it comes down to, I guess, being the young guy on the team is going to would make life a little bit easier for Jacob as well, because you're going to have a coach that is a lot more appealing for other youngsters to join, B, knowing of how to approach your specific situation and how to get you out of a slump. And I was thinking, by the way, when you said about the opening scouting record, Slent was actually a good pickup. I think he just got ruined
for the
later
time
on.
period, it was all right.
Yeah, he just got ruined later on. He was a massive talent initially, so I actually like that one. But yeah, that's gonna be an interesting one. So I suggest for now we leave that in the history books and we say a couple of words about what happened at EPL. Now, the first question I want to ask you, because I know you're gonna have an opinion on this, was ESL Pro League Season 23 really an elite level event?
Here's the thing. It's not about Vitality not being there. That's just one top team. The real problem is the fact that the group stages were both online, I thought did take away from the event.
Sure.
Like you look at some of the teams who made it out of the groups who were more unexpected. Like, by the way, this is the first time Fut's made the playoffs.
Yeah.
Right. That's not as cool when it was online. We already know they're good online. They've been dominated online for the last 9 months. The problem was, if you think about all those other lands, they also showed really good performances in all the other group stages that were lands, but they couldn't quite get over the line. And it was usually the last game that they'd fall apart. So I don't think, unfortunately, you can say that they proved that they didn't do that, even though they made them run all the way to the semis here. That's the issue with the online portion to me. It's also why I get a little bit annoyed that both Blast and ESL did this thing where they chose to go back in time 25 years and go, part of it's online. And now they're all announcing, like, we've just invented lands. Like, guys, everything's land now. And everyone in the scene, like a scene has just happened. Brilliant. Oh, it's going to be so great having lands. Like, what, you mean like the last 20 years of Counter-Strike, you lunatic? What are we doing? You haven't invented that. That was it's you made it worse, and now you're making it not as bad and expecting to get a round of applause. So that's the problem.
You know what that's like?
It's not that online CS doesn't count. Right. It's that, unfortunately, it isn't the same as land Counter-Strike.
Yeah.
So I can't take the same conclusions, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's kind of like, I'm gonna give a very extreme example, but for whatever reason, I'm thinking of George Orwell right now. It's kind of like telling people, instead of getting ice cream 3 times a week, 3 times a week, you're not gonna get any ice cream. Then 2 weeks pass, and then you tell them, okay, now you're gonna get ice cream once a week, and everyone's so happy and everyone's applauding,
Yeah.
and they're like, yeah, this is fantastic. No, this is this is very weird. In the same sense, it does create a lot of questions. I think Foot is one of the teams. I think for me, Legacy is actually the main one, because I don't really know if they would have
Yeah,
made
there's
it to
another
the
problem. They had
quarterfinals.
some really good results in this
Yeah,
group stage here, but I have the same feeling you do, Ted. They looked kind of done when they were. I know it was with the old roster without Art, but even
yeah.
so, they looked really toothless on the actual real lands. So the problem is, because they then didn't do that much for me in the playoffs, I can't really give them like the gold star that they would otherwise get. Like I would be wildly hyped if this had been a LAN run, but right now it's like if they go to the next LAN and suck, then I'll just be like, who gives a shit about EPL Online's group stage, isn't it?
Yeah, that's why it's a little bit weird. But then in the same time, I guess it did provide people with another extra conversation. First of all, Foot was able to beat MOUZ on LAN in front of a stage, which proves that MOUZ is officially, I guess, somehow mentally weaker than a group of 19-year-olds that are playing in front of a crowd for the first time. But the interesting conversation about this playoff bracket, Duncan, was who's going to win the EPL trophy. Is it going to be Spirit or is it going to be MOUZ? And that one aged very well, where both these teams lose in their round 1 matchups in the
Yeah.
quarterfinals. MOUZ lose to Foot, that are absolute debutees when it comes down to playing in front of a crowd. Spirit lose a 2-0 game to Astralis, 13-6, 13-7, which I watched that game. It wasn't, I casted that game for the Bulgarian broadcast. I will tell you right now, I've not seen Spirit and Donk that helpless in my life. I've not seen Donk that helpless as he was in that game. And I wouldn't even say it was his fault necessarily. I'd say every single time Donk got a kill, he got refragged. He never was allowed to get a multi-kill. I think he ended the game on something crazy like 2 or 3 multi-kills over the course of the entire series, which is mental for a player like Donk, who usually gets, between 6 and 9 multi-kills per map or so. So he was neutralized. Both Spirit and MOUZ flop it. And before we talk about NAVI, what do these results mean for, we're going to start it off with MOUZ, because I feel like with Spirit, people had lower expectations to begin with. Sure, the way they lost to Astralis was an abomination, but when it comes down to MOUZ, from being the team that goes into top 4 and then loses to Vitality in the semifinals, and that's why you're not winning an event, now you go into the playoffs of a tournament that by a lot was described as a banana cup, the group stage where usually top teams should struggle, you farm, and then you go into the quarterfinals and you lose to Foot with, I guess, Torji having a very tough series, with Exertion not having a great event and a great series as well. What do you make of it if you're MOUZ? Is that the final, is that the last straw? Do you start thinking about changes now?
To me, this is like a fundamental step down from last year. It's not the
Yeah,
fact that it's like your first 58th. It's that what you've done right now is this. People will forget, like, before there was levels to how MOUZ progressed. Like, if you
yeah,
remember, if you go back to 2024, they could win studio events. Famously, ESL Pro League used to have like fuck all viewers, so they were like really good in studios, bet boom events, etc. But if you ever went to the event with the arena, they were sus in all arena matches. Even in a quarterfinal, you might be worried they'd lose. That's why they're doing so badly at the majors. Then last year, though, they got to another level. The another level they unlocked was beyond the majors, where bizarrely they actually would, like in the last one, obviously this one at Budapest, they were a bit whack in that one. But beyond that, you could actually rely that even though MOUZ wouldn't win the tournament, they'd only lose to like a top 3 team, though. You had to be really fucking good to beat them. And usually, if it wasn't the major, they're locked to make the semis
yeah.
at least. And then maybe they can even make a final, right? That's when a lot of the excuses worked. That's when you could go, well, in season 1, Vitality was beating everyone, weren't they? In season 2, well, you know what? Donk was playing out of his mind early on, so how could we beat him at Cologne? Or you had these teams like Furia then coming out strong towards the end of the year. Falcons got really good. That story was okay, but even then he got criticised because you're supposed to compete with those teams. You're not supposed to lose to them all the time. It's way worse now, because if you look who's eliminating them now, Ted, it is like Foot, Paravision. That's not even at the same level of opposition you're losing
Yeah.
to. And then this one I think is the most egregious, because if anyone wants to tell me, yeah, but how can we win tournaments when Vitality wins everything? Vitality wasn't at this tournament. As you just said, the only other favourite on paper was fucking Spirit, because there's no Falcons. Spirit also lost in the round of it. That means if you're MOUZ, if you'd have just beaten Foot, a bunch
Yeah.
of 19-year-old, 20-year-old inexperienced players, you would have had on paper a free run to a tier 1 trophy. If you are so good that it's only Vitality Zero that's holding you back. Instead, you actually made an absolute fool of yourself in this round of 8, especially because, I'll just throw this out there, a lot of people like me are really enjoying watching FUT play. If you watch FUT play, one thing that you know is here's who FUT loses to. Teams that are good at closing out games. So actually, that's the worst thing too. This series was really close, but it was actually FUT, the inexperienced ones, who closed it out and looked like the veterans. This is exactly where if you're MOUZ, that's not even, you don't even get props for beating FUT. That's supposed to be holding serve, bro. Like, I would even have flamed if you'd have lost to NAVI. So I'm really shocked because I think if you beat FUT, you just win the whole tournament, mate. And instead, you've made an absolute fool of yourself. It's your worst result of the year.
Yeah, that's the thing. I expected, by the way, because as soon as FUT got over MOUZ and we saw what NAVI did against the Mongols in the quarterfinals, I was ready. I was ready to put my life on the line that NAVI was going to win that semifinal game. FUT is a great team. They shoot very, very, very hard, but usually those teams struggle, especially on stage, against teams that prepare well and have good structure and are just not going to let your individuals run and hit, right? And then when the game goes close, as you said, you're expecting the team with the veterans and the individuals that have played on stages before to just be a little bit more composed and a little bit more calm. Especially when we're talking about a MOUZ team that spent the entirety of last year playing against one of the most dominant teams in the history of Counter-Strike and having so many close series against them. You'd feel like they should be confident enough in that type of a circumstance. I just don't know what happened with MOUZ in that game. I feel like they themselves mentally just gave up. And this is a conversation that I really don't enjoy having too much, just talking about how poor the mental on a team is. But with MOUZ, it's pretty similar with some of the games when you watch Aurora, even though with Aurora is a lot more flamboyant, as you know, they're Eastern European, they're very emotional and everything. But with MOUZ, I think the obvious thing is that sometimes
Fair enough.
What? Sorry?
You said Eastern European, bizarrely. You meant Turkish.
Well, Turkish and Eastern European is kind of, it's still Eastern Europe, you know.
Is Turkey considered Eastern? I don't
Yeah. It's Southeastern Europe. Yeah,
it's all good.
Yeah,
whatever you say, man.
Well, we can claim them. It's fine. If Bulgaria is Eastern Europe, then Turkey can be Eastern Europe as well. But the main point is with MOUZ, they're a little bit colder when it comes down to the emotions, but you can still tell that they're a little bit desperate at times, right? It just feels like they just don't believe in themselves. They just look a little bit dire in some of these moments, and I just feel like at a certain point you will need to start thinking about making somewhat of a switch. Now I've seen some people, Maui I think called for Brolin, that it's time for him to go out. I think I've seen a lot on Twitter with ideas on what should change on MOUZ. I just know that something needs to change. I don't know if it's the in-game leadership, because then the counter question would be, who do you pick up? Do you just double down and be like, hey, Shuey, want to come back? Or you just go for somebody else? I don't really know who you pick up if you are MOUZ and you want an IGL that's going to win you trophies. When it comes down to FUT, I think, honestly, they did win the game, which is great, but they were allowed to. They should never be allowed to win a game like this. So for MOUZ, this is a massive disappointment. From here on out, I don't know, unless Blast Open Rotterdam is a massive success, I don't really know if we're even going to see the same MOUZ 5 at the major. There might be some changes prior to it, because, again, as you pointed out, this was supposed to be a team that's barely losing to the best teams in the world, and now they just lost to FUT in a quarterfinal game in an event that they should have won, which is very, very odd. Have you thought about who you would replace on MOUZ if you were to make a move?
I mean, I do think IGL is the most obvious piece to remove, because, again, I think it's a position that can potentially affect multiple other players on your team. So if you can get the right upgrade at that position, it might make the other players more effective. Because one of my problems with MOUZ is this. You know, when people ask that question over and over again, but the problem is it starts to get like they're not asking it in good faith. It sounds like they're just asking it to be annoying. You know, when they go, but are MOUZ really actually problematic, or are they just really good and they're just not as good as Vitality and whoever else, and they're just the third or fourth best team? If they were just the third or fourth best team, I'll give you a contrast. Remember last year when Mongols was like the fourth or fifth best team for most of the year, right? Yes, early on they used to choke, After that, they still were the third or fourth best team, but they used to play a really great semi-final, lose to a
Yeah.
Vitality or a Spirit or something. The point is, they didn't play that much differently in the playoff match. As you just said earlier, every MOUZ collapse beyond against elite teams, which we allow them to lose to some of the time, they have collapses where they themselves just look like shit in the server.
Yeah.
Like, if they played the way they did in some of these matches, the best example ever is the major against FaZe. If they played the way they did in the game against FaZe, you would never have heard of MOUZ. They'd be an irrelevant team who'd never been all these playoffs. The point is, they don't play that in group stages. In group stages, they're really good. In
Yeah.
group stages, they are like the third or fourth best team in the world. In fact, the joke is, sometimes in group stages, as proven out by their record, you would take them over a team that on paper you might think are better, like Falcons. You might just say, fuck it. Actually, they're more reliable to get out of the group stage. You can rely on MOUZ. The problem is, though, they are really unreliable when it's the big playoff games now. And that is something where, like, at this point, they said in that interview, Spinks, like, something to the gist of, like, if we get the one win, it sort of makes it worth it. It doesn't, because at this point in time, actually, you're not inconsistent. You consistently fail in the same scenarios. Like, right now, we would all bet our house you won't win the major. It's not even though on paper you're going to have to still be fourth or fifth in, like, the list of teams that could win. Everyone's going to know that, like, you aren't going to be the one that does it.
You'd say probably there's a higher chance that Falcons win the major than there is MOUZ winning the major.
That's even unreasonable. Everyone in their brain can immediately imagine m0NESY having a great match, or Kiyasuke steps his level up, or they get like a streak on a couple of maps. MOUZ has problems across the board, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think with MOUZ, the interesting thing is and this is going to be the last thing I say about them, and then we go Spirit and some quick words about NAVI. With MOUZ, I still remember that interview from Exertion. I'm not sure what event it was. It was like 1.5 years, 2 years ago, where he goes, we're trying to, I guess, program our brains, wire our brains into the way that we're always making the same decisions in the same place, no matter the situation we're in. So no matter if the game is going well, no matter if the game is going badly, we're trying to read the situation well and actually play to win and not play not to lose, right? And it's very interesting for me that he came out and said that, because this is the feeling that I'm getting out of MOUZ whenever things, when shit hits the fan, pretty much. Whenever they start struggling, a lot of the times you would see players just being afraid to make a move. It's not quite the same as what you said about Liquid, where people just don't want to be the next person to be kicked, but it's the same thing on a much smaller scale, where they're like, I don't want to be the guy to make the mistake in this round that causes us the round. But then eventually, when no one wants to be the guy that makes the mistake in the first, let's say, 1 minute, then you need to just do something that is very weird and very rushed and very forced later on into the round, and it just doesn't work. And I feel like for them, it's very easy to lose that presence of mind where they're actually playing brave Counter-Strike, because they usually are not a team that plays scared Counter-Strike. Overpass has always been a good example of that, where on the CT side, they're going to be proactive, play for the map. Exertion is just going to be running middle, con, out short, helping people, looking for fights. This is the type of MOUZ that can dominate, and that's the type of CS they play in group stages. Then they go to the playoffs and they just don't play the same style of CS, which is unfortunate because they can, but they're not. So eventually, I think you have to make a change if the players are just, I don't know, incapable of replicating what they're doing in the group stage.
No one wants to hear it, Ted. There's one more. If you think the Neo move was unpopular because he's a legend, Cyclone built this team, but eventually, surely he has to, if he gets all the props for it, is there not something with how he's coaching that's potentially held them back from getting to the next level? I don't see why it's impossible to discuss this. Like, also, this is where what people have to actually decide for MOUZ, in my opinion, because it'll change and color how you make all your decisions about the roster, is who do you actually think MOUZ is? Do you think MOUZ is a medium to slightly above average level European League Counter-Strike squad that essentially has overperformed? They've got a bunch of really good academy players, and actually, as a result, third to fourth is excellent. And who even have a chance to win the major means he's done a great job, and all we ever want to be is a really awesome third or fourth best team? Or are they a team that, if they changed something, could win everything and be one of the dominant all-time great teams? If you believe the former, keep the same squad as it is, just run it as long as you can and see how long this all goes, in which case Cyclone's killing it. If you believe the latter, which sometimes I do when I look at the quality of the players, then if you were a football coach, you would be fired now. You just would. You wouldn't get 3 years doing this, mate. You'd get a year or two. In fact, what normally happens in football is you'd get the first year, the second year they go, if you make a bit of improvement, which he did, you go, right, you get the next year. This year's the year you'd get fired if you were Cyclone, if it was football.
Yeah, I think the Spinks move made it a little bit more believable that the organization actually wants to be in the position to win trophies as well, right? Because when they got Brolin, he was on a bit of a downward trajectory, and people were not really sure if he was still, one of the best players. Whereas when they got Spinks out of Vitality, he was still one of the best riflers in the world. So I think that showed some intention. Maybe it did. We'll see if they make more changes, and if they make more changes, what players they sign, because this is very important, because they still don't have that one guy that has to be the leader in big moments and can be the superstar. Exertion is supposed to be that person, but he's been a little bit
I have a
unsuccessful.
question for you because
Yeah,
I've come
sure.
up with a few what I call like analytical lenses. So the
Yeah.
same thing, I would actually say the same thing about Neo as I will about Broland now. Here's what I think shows you're in a really bad situation as a team. Beyond rare exceptions, like I'll give you an example, right? Jim, the role he plays in Paravision is extremely unique because he's not
Yeah.
only IGL and AWPA, but he has that really unique playing style. So as a result, he wouldn't fit that many teams. But ignore extreme examples. If you just take normal teams, here's like a lens I have that I apply, and it goes like this. You know, at the end, when you think, should we keep this person? Should we kick them? A question you can ask yourself is this: if you kick that person, how many other good teams at your level or above will rush to sign them? If the answer is none,
All
then
right.
odds are, unless they were really
Yeah.
uniquely good to your team, you're probably actually holding on to someone who's not that good anymore, and you're just thinking of the better times. So I'll give you an
Mm,
example. Like I would have said the same thing about Rain in FaZe Clan. Right? Obviously, now he went to be an IGL and did a totally different sideways move.
sure.
If he just stayed and he was just like, I'm still Rain, I still do the same thing. I'm a bit of a support development, do as a bit of entry if you want, and I do it sort of freestyle without needing the tactics. How many top 10 teams would sign him? I think zero. I think literally zero
Right.
teams would even contact him. So I would say the same thing. If you are Brawler and I fire you tomorrow because I'm trying to make a gamble on who I'm going to get as the IGL,
Yeah.
does any other team sign him as IGL? I think if anything, he's forced to go back to being a normal player, and then
Yeah.
he'd be like he'd go one level down. The joke is he'd be on an OG or a Gamer Legion. He might even be a better player, but he still seems like he can frag. But I don't think he would get an IGL role. So that's why that then makes me ask the following question: is he doing something so specifically unique to MOUZ that justifies him staying if the team isn't getting the results? And that's where I actually sort of side with no personally. So
Sure.
even though I do totally agree, it would be a gamble. You could even get worse making this move,
Yeah.
as with all roster moves. That's just a move where, to me, I think of all the people relative to their role, he is the worst at his role.
Right, right. It's just the life policy as well, I think, right? Are you happy with this level, or are you willing to risk? And it could cause, a drop in performance or in quality, but it could cause an improvement as well. So do you want to be stagnant, or do you want to risk it and have a switch up, right? I think that's the best way to put it with MOUZ. What are we thinking of Spirit's loss to Astralis? I kind of shared my opinion on that. I think that was simultaneously probably the best day of Astralis that I've seen in years, and the worst day I've seen out of Donk and out of Spirit in a very long time. So is it equally disappointing for Spirit as it was for MOUZ to lose in the first round, if not even more? I think for Spirit probably it was even more, because they did get absolutely destroyed by Astralis.
The problem is, because they skipped PGL Cluj Poker, we still have a very limited LAN sample size for Spirit. Because think
Sure.
about it, right? Both Blast and here, as soon as it gets to LAN, they've been eliminated. So we've never gotten to see them do like 7, 8, 9, 10 map streaks. We just had the one Krakow run. So to me, I still think it's slightly too early. I know a lot of people have
Yeah.
really strong conclusions about all the. For me, it's still slightly too early to really know how it works out. I still see flashes where they're really good. Also, then you've got to throw out there, Donk is so insanely good that actually a bad land for him, as in a really bad one, is extremely rare. We all remember
Yeah.
the Cologne run from 2024. Like, this was on that level. So unfortunately, I also do think that when you have as pivotal a player like him have one of his worst ever lands, and not just a bad one, normally even a bad one for him is like average for most people, a really bad one, you are going to have way worse chance to do anything competitive. And then my issue is, so essentially what I'm saying is I'm having a hard time reading how much of this is magic. It's like,
Yeah.
by the way, Chopper, as you saw, if he had a Donk performances, wouldn't be able to do anything either. But then the last thing is this. What I worry about in their team is a lot of my justification for why they were making moves wasn't just keep Donk happy and Chonka's not a good idea. One of the main goals of bringing Magics in as IGL and bringing back Zontics and essentially having everyone know their roles and be familiar with the team was then there's only one piece that hasn't been integrated, which is Taneer.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, even though it's still a limited sample size, they still haven't implemented him as a star player. Like,
Yeah.
it just hasn't happened. He looks quite similar to what he was last season, where he was just a whatever player. And sadly, he has, beyond like, not even a game, just beyond like the odd map, he's never really touched that air that he had in Heroic, where he did genuinely look like a true star player who was mad overqualified to be at that level. So part of my issue is I still feel like it's a lot of it's the same spirit, and I don't think you'll get another event like this. I imagine you'll be much better at the next events, etc.
Yeah.
But if a lot of our dream, and I know it was mine, was that Taneer becomes a star, and then suddenly you don't worry about the structure because you're more looking at all the top players there. That's never happened so far. That is a pipe dream right now. So that is yet to happen.
I agree with you. I'm finding it difficult to be disappointed. I was more so shocked that Astralis actually played that well in that
Yeah,
game.
it's more props to Astralis for that for me, mate. Yeah,
Yeah.
respect.
I think they played. It was one of these games where you could tell you definitely expect a little bit more out of Spirit, but I'd say you expect more out of Spirit on an individual level, and maybe at times you could see that they were just desperate and they were going for solo plays, and it wasn't that coordinated. But Astralis had very good spacing. They had a very good idea, had very good game plan. FaZe peaked in his career. He posted, I think, 2 of his 3 best LAN
For
maps
sure.
in this game, which is mental. So there was a lot of things that did align for Astralis, and obviously Stair had a great event all in all. So I think for Spirit it was just very,
Bro,
very
Huxley
bad
had as
moment.
many kills in the series as Donk. Case closed.
That is
It's funny.
wild.
It
Yeah.
wasn't that Huxley dropped 50. He dropped
Yeah.
21.
Oh
You know
yeah,
what I
he
mean?
dropped 21 and Donk has 21 as well. I'm just looking
That's
at it
the
right now.
problem.
That was actually shocking, yeah. Well, technically Huxley has more kills than everyone on Spirit bar Tenier. Yeah, bar Tenier. Wow.
And
Shiro, who's got 24. Right. Huxley's thriving. Maybe that was what went wrong. But
Yeah.
yeah, in general, what this did for Spirit and MOUZ, well, what this did for Navi actually was it opened up an opportunity for them to win a trophy. They won the ESL Pro League. Ima posted his highest rated map on LAN ever, both as a Navi player and just in general. Makazze got his first career MVP. Wonderful, played a phenomenal LAN as well. Navi probably looked like the best Navi we've seen ever since, I want to say, the quarterfinals of the Budapest Major. Because in Budapest, again, I was very disappointed. I thought they had to make the final. We all remember the way that they lost to FaZe on that Inferno with the twist, the ego, which was, I want to say, a little bit unfortunate for Navi because they were the better team in that game and they did deserve to go to that major final. But now they've entered the year in a very good way. When you think about it, Krakow, they lost to Spirit and Furia. Then Cluj, they lose a quarterfinal game to MOUZ in 3 maps, which is honestly fair enough. And then EPL, even though they did struggle in the groups a little bit, but again, as we said, this is online Counter-Strike, so as soon as you make it, if you're a top dog, it's fine. In the playoffs, they got a very legitimate bracket. They 2-0 Mongols, they 2-1 Foot that were on the back of just beating MOUZ the day before. And then in the grand final, another grand final that they win in a 3-1 fashion. They should have won in a 3-0 fashion because Anubis, again, had a lot of bullshit that went over for
Yeah,
Aurora.
they almost got it over the line, man.
Yeah, so in my books, Navi was the best team in this tournament by far. I think that's one of the cleanest tournament wins that we've seen in a while that hasn't been Vitality. What do you make of that performance out of Navi? Was the main thing that gets you excited about this? Is that just because the other big teams flopped, or was Navi really that good enough for your money that we can start considering them, join that top 4, top 5 in the world, or is this just a one-off playoff event where they just look like one of the best teams?
Problem is, when you did the player evaluation of like the
Yeah,
opponents there, you were just kind because you used the form in tournament of those teams.
sure.
History will not look kindly on this playoff run. If I say Navi in 2026 won a tournament during the Vitality year, then you find out Vitality wasn't there. All the other top teams lost.
Yeah.
They never faced him, and then they played the Mongols with Cobra Zera, Foot, who have never done anything, and then in the final they played Aurora, who everyone knows in finals just basically hand you the trophy every time. Like, as you say, mate, the only map Aurora won, the Anubis, they should have giga stomped that. And actually, they were about ready to give the bloody map up. They could
Yeah.
have lost 3-0. So, no, the real issue is this, is for Navi, it's too far the other way. Like, it looks like some of this was like for me, it's a little bit fool's gold. Like, you didn't beat anyone good, so I can't give you like mad props for that. Like, put it this way, this doesn't in any way put you in a conversation of could you be the best team in CS2. Like, that's not even a discussion,
Yeah.
even though you just won a big event. Then also, if you look at who had the performances, at the moment, these aren't performances you can rely on. So the MVP of the tournament was makazze. Listen, if you're Blade, 2 thumbs up. You brought a guy from the academy team.
Yeah.
He obviously was even a Foot player, if people don't know. And actually, he went from last season, he was like an X Factor type player where he was more streaky and it was more like he just did his job and played decisively. But he wasn't going to be the guy who carried the game. To now he's had a breakout tournament where he's actually fully carried the whole thing. Even though Wonderful was better than the final. makazze was the MVP. If you count the whole tournament, he should have been the MVP. That was totally legitimate. But is that going to really hold over to the next event? We can't really say right now. This is the first time it's properly happened. Then, even though, by the way, Wonderful actually had an amazing final. He was hitting every fucking like normal shot. He just never missed them pretty much. Was also just banging in like big key situations. That was your best player, you could argue, for most of last year. The problem this year has been he's actually been really bad. Like, actually, until this one event, he was actually struggling a lot and he was actually
Yeah.
getting a lot of the criticism back. So, even though for him, he at least has the track record, I could believe he could get back to being a good player. Even so, that might be the best I've ever seen him play, mate. Like, I don't know that I can really expect that, like, next tournament to tournament to tournament. So, the good news for Navi is you still have a lot of the core aspects that make you a good team. You are very strong tactically. You have, like, a good sort of baseline level across the maps. I still think, as another example of something I'm worried about for them, is I still think their map pool's a bit too weak if they ever want to win real tournaments against real opposition. Because if you watch this one, like I say about the opponents, when you watch this run, does it really make you think, wow, if they go to the next line and they play Vitality or Falcons, or will they beat them? I don't know if it really changes that.
No, I don't think it does. I think what it establishes is something that we knew already, but it amplifies it a little bit. Because you remember towards the end of last year, we would kind of put Navi in the same category as a MOUZ, where they would rarely beat the teams that are better than them, but you would
Yeah.
almost never see them lose to the teams that are
Yes.
worse than them. So now I think what that result has done is that has clarified, okay, Navi is better maybe right now than the Mongols, than Aurora, and is not going to get upset by the next big dark horse that is Foot, right? Which is a slight improvement in my book, because sometime last year I would say that maybe Navi playing Aurora or playing Mongols, even though they've always been very good against these types of teams because of stylistic, approach being different, and Navi being a bit more structured and preparing well, and Blade, I guess, just finding it easy to expose the weaknesses or find the weaknesses in the systems of these teams, giving them an advantage. I wouldn't put my money on them to beat them every single time it's an important game. So I think it is an improvement because of the individuals as well. I feel like the firepower did play out a massive role in this one. So I agree with you. I share that concern. The one reason that I am actually a little bit hopeful for Navi is Bit's performance, because I think he was excellent and he's been their best player, I think, consistency-wise since the start of the year. Which for my money, he looks sharp. He looks very decisive. He just looks world class right now, Bit. And that's the one thing that I'm sure about. I feel like he's the one pillar on this team. I agree that with makazze, you never know if he's gonna have the same event like that. Obviously, it looks like his career is going on the right path, so maybe there is a chance. Wonderful is a lot more volatile because, again, that was a 125 or something rated event for him, and then he started the year with a 0.82 and a 1.02 or something like this, so it's a massive jump. It's impossible to predict if that's going to happen against the top teams. And with him is kind of like the same story, right? Today he's going to join the server, he's going to drop a 25 and 6 on Mirage, and you're going to say, oh my god, is the Paris major once again, and then the next map he's going to be 8 and 19. So it's impossible to predict. But the one thing that I think we did see out of Navi this event was that they can enter that top 4, top 5 spot where they really only just lose to teams like Vitality, Falcons, Furia. Maybe that's it, right? And then they can beat the rest. And honestly, I feel like if you're a Navi and if you can, beat everybody else and just play clean Counter-Strike, because right now with how scrappy a lot of the teams are, Navi is one of the teams that's playing the cleanest Counter-Strike out there. And you know that you're not going to be the team that wins the event, but that doesn't really mean that you're not going to make semifinals or finals depending on the bracket. I honestly feel like this is a good place to be if you're Navi, because then you will be able to win some of these events where Vitality doesn't attend.
Put it this way, contrast them with the aforementioned Spirit and MOUZ. They also didn't have amazing opponents to beat. They just took care of business though and won the tournament. The difference is those teams couldn't take care of business when there was no Vitality in their face. And then also, even though in theory Navi's actually a worse team than MOUZ, the reason why we don't hate on Navi the same way is what I said earlier. They don't just capitulate and lose. They get beaten by people in semi-finals. Like MOUZ actually does, like you see here, sometimes just play bad and then lose. So that's one thing. That's why I think a lot of people do respect Navi, even if they don't think they can win like the major, for example.
Yeah. Also, you have the argument that with Navi is never as clean when they make it out the group stage. You know they will, but they do struggle. So people don't expect, Wonderful to just join in and be the best hopper in the world. Whereas I think with some of the players on MOUZ, you have higher expectations maybe. So that's I think the most important things out of EPL when it comes down to Legacy, as we said, it's a little bit difficult to have an opinion because they did play the majority of their games online. And with Astralis, step in the right direction. Probably didn't deserve to make it into the final, but fair enough for beating Spirit. I think they're going to be happy with this. So we're going
This
to...
is one of the reasons why everyone does
Yeah.
think Blade is the GOAT coach now. Because as
Okay.
much as people want to say about like Falcons, yeah, it's really hard to win tournaments. Blade does it even with rosters like this, though. That's the problem. If you're Zonic, you can't look at his roster and yours and say yours is like fucking way better than his. Like it isn't, mate. Like they're comparable rosters. In fact, yours is slightly better. Let's be real, because you've just got some crazy firepower he doesn't. So if he can still, even if it's the Star Series, not. You know what, mate? You go to these lands. You can go to a PGL too, mate. What's stopping you winning a tournament? So I think that Blade in that sense. That's why everyone gives him the props. It's deserved.
Yeah,
He's
no,
earned it.
no. It is skill gapped. Even if you look at the tactical timeouts, it's because you referenced towards Tico, by the way. One of the things that he was talking about in one of his recent interviews was, or not interviews, but videos, was following when a tactical timeout comes through and what changes in the game. When you look at Navi, it's just so outrageous how much improvement there is every single time that Blade can just have 30 seconds to speak, right? So there is obvious reasons for him to be getting all of that credit. And now we're going to be traveling to Blast Open Rotterdam, which is going to be one of the final big events before the major cutoff. So we're not going to go into too much detail when it comes down to this one, Duncan, but we've got Vitality, we have Fury, we have MOUZ, Falcons, Parivision, Navi, Aurora, Spirit, basically all the top dogs. The Mongols are there, FaZe are there, Liquid will be there with Malps to play his first event. Then you've got teams like Bait, NIP Energy, 9Z, and Tyloo. So I'm just going to shoot straight, and I will ask you if Vitality are winning this event or not, in your opinion. We're just going to do some quick fire predictions. Is Vitality your choice for a winner?
Yes, I think
Yeah?
Vitality is not only easily the best team in the world, but
Yeah?
right now, one of the biggest problems you have is you have to actually get them before the final. You can't get, if you go to the BO5, I don't think any team can beat them in the world. I don't care who they are. Like, I think everyone, if they go for the full BO5, will just get stretched out and will play the wrong maps and won't be able to maintain the level. This is probably the team where if they're going to lose, they're going to lose in the quarterfinals. Otherwise, you're probably not beating them.
All right. And then in terms of, because I was just gonna give my Vitality prediction as well. I don't really believe in Fury right now. If anything, the other two teams that I believe in the most after Vitality are actually Falcons and Navi at this point. I don't believe in Fury and MOUZ that much. Parivision maybe to some extent. We'll see how they get back to LAN Counter-Strike. But if you had to give one dark horse team that you think might be a little bit exciting that is not Vitality, we're not talking Fury and MOUZ Falcons territory here. We're talking the teams that are below a little bit. What are you thinking there? Anyone that excites you a little bit? Because for me personally, I won't lie to you, this tournament doesn't really feel like one that's going to have a lot of surprises. For me, that tournament just looks like this is going to be the type of event where the top dogs just make it into the playoffs, they battle between each other, and then Vitality win the trophy. This is how I'm looking at it, at least.
Right, the real problem is, I still think NIP's team, the results are
Yeah.
bad, but I actually think whenever you watch them play, you can see why there is potential. Like, put it this way, I do think some of their players, funnily enough, the two Ukrainians, actually play worse than they are as players. I don't know what's wrong about them so far in competitive matches. The other angle, obviously, is if some of the things we just said earlier about Liquid apply, if actually immediately, put it this way, if Elise is going to post a 1.2 rating and Malbs is going to come in and that dynamic works, you could win a lot of games. Because actually, one thing is, even though Liquid's results are terrible, man, the amount of games I have seen them play though, where like they could have won the map, but they just make all these shit players, like Falcons-esque screenshot type players, where they blow it. So I still feel like people always forget when you have good players who are playing worse than they should. Sometimes it really can just be one change, can just make like three people play better instead of just one.
And it's a similar conversation that we had about FaZe. Although there we don't really know what the change is going to be permanently. So this is going to be interesting. NIP did win a LAN event just now that Liquid attended with JO. They won the Roman Imperium Cup. So maybe they bring in a little bit of momentum into it. But it will be interesting to follow. If I had to lock in a prediction, I would just go Vitality win the event. And maybe if I'm talking about a potential underdog that does well, I don't really know if Navi counts as an underdog, but I can just ride that train. I am excited to see what NIP are going to be able to do as well, because now I think they have a little bit of momentum and a lot of the top teams are on shaky legs, so maybe that's going to provide them with an opportunity. Regardless, this is going to be everything for today. I think we discussed enough topics. Thank you very much for joining me on this one. It was an absolute pleasure, and of course, everyone can check out at this point, I don't know what the number of the exact shows that you do is. You're doing one with me. You've got Feed the Trolls. You've got Snake and Banter. You've got Hot Take Point Mate. Anything else that we're missing out?
I'd say yes. That's it.
Yeah, yeah, and then you've got all the bunch of different games as well. You've got League and maybe some other stuff as well. So yeah, people can find all of these links in the description. Thank you very much for joining me, and for everyone, another quick reminder that this show is brought to you as well, courtesy of Azon, best headset out there. So you can use code TED for 10% off, and you can get yourself some good old headphones for CS gaming and some other gaming, but mainly for CS gaming. But yeah, thank you for being with us. That's been about it. Let us know if you think that Liquid should disband. That's a good way to put it. Yeah, let us know in the comments, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.